Hi friends, it's Grace and welcome back to another video. Today it is time for, if you ask me, one of my favorite videos and one of the most fun videos to make every single year, which is the mid-year book Freakout Tag 2023 edition. So this should be my third time doing this because I was on BookTube in April of 2021, and so I don't explicitly remember doing this in the first year, but I know I did because I love this video, I love watching it, I love making it, and I love answering the questions. So this is the third edition for me personally, and I just love this snapshot that it provides of the reading year so far, like for me to assess my own reading, and also, like I said, I just love watching other people do this and kind of getting that brief synopsis of how their reading has gone, what they've been loving, and it's just really, really fun. So without further ado, let's just get into the questions. The first question in this tag, which is just like a real gut punch to start because it's one of the hardest things to choose, and that is, what is the best book you've read so far in 2023? This tag really just comes out swinging right at the beginning, and my answer for this is going to be A Storm of Swords by George R.R. Martin, book 3 in A Song of Ice and Fire, which I'm sure many people are familiar with. So there are other books that I could have chosen for this, but I decided to give them some love in other parts of this tag just because there are other questions that they could better apply to in terms of like books that I've loved this year. And A Storm of Swords, I do still truly believe is one of my favorite books of all time. This was a reread for me and one of the best fantasy books ever written. So that is obviously a personal opinion, but I read this probably 12 or 11 years ago, and I loved it then, and I loved it just as much when I reread it this year. This has some of the most like explosive moments. It has some of the best payoffs. It has some phenomenal character journeys. There's just so much to be said for what goes on in this book, and it does wrap up some arcs of the series very nicely. And when I was doing my reread of A Song of Ice and Fire this year, this is actually where I stopped, and I will reread the rest of the series if we ever see another book published. But for now, I think it's just best for me to end on a high note with this book that I adore, and that's really all that needs to be said. It's one of the best. Okay, so question 2 is the best sequel that you've read so far in 2023, and I did not restrict myself to book 2 in a series because to me sequel means any book in a series that's not the first one. However, it just does happen that the 2 books that I chose as the answer to this are both second books in a series, so this is like true sequels, if you will. So if there's one thing about me, it's that I'm gonna cheat on a tag, and I couldn't choose just one answer for this, and it's because these are 2 of my favorite series anyway. So the 2 books, or the first of the 2 books of the best sequels that I've read this year, are The Liar's Knot by M.A. Carrick, or rather is The Liar's Knot. This is the first book that I have chosen. The Mask of Mirrors, the first book in this series, was an instant favorite for me. It was so good. And The Liar's Knot just did everything that Mask of Mirrors did that I loved, and yet more of it. And I loved it so much for that. Like, we went so much deeper into the world and the magic and the sort of like, there's a lot of juggling of identities in this book and this series. Like, our main characters, whether they are leading double lives in a figurative sense or in a literal sense, where they literally have like a secret identity versus their real identity and so on. There's a lot of symbolism regarding that. There's a lot of character development regarding that. It ties into the plot, the magic, the politics. This series is so rich with all of that stuff. The setting of this city, Nadezhra, I don't really know how to pronounce it. It all just feels so vivid, and I love this world. I enjoy being in this world so much, and I loved this sequel so much, and I could not be more excited to continue in the series whenever that option is available to me. The second phenomenal sequel that I read this year is The Kingdom of Copper by S.A. Chakraborty, which is the second book in the Daevabad trilogy. So honestly, a lot of the stuff that I just said for The Liar's Knot can be said the same about Kingdom of Copper in terms of the elevation of the characters and the plot, and also the mythology that we're drawing from in here. It supports the characters and the plot so much, and the magic and all of that is so important to each other. It all ties together, and the politics, in both of these series and books, there is a simmering tension that is just below a boil between different cultures in the same city in this world, and it's our characters trying to navigate that and trying to do what they believe is best and achieve their own goals, which in a lot of cases involves doing what's best for their own people and fighting for their own people, but not really trying to cause an entire collapse of their world that will just hurt more people. And the characters are so phenomenal. They take a step up in Kingdom of Copper compared to City of Brass. They are so dynamic and well fleshed out, and I sympathize with them so much. And they go through a lot of struggles that, while might not be realistic in terms of the real world, the emotions that are associated with them very much are and are relatable, and the relationships that are built are amazing. And there's so much to say about why I love both of these books, and a lot of them are the same, which just goes to show you what I love in books. Question number 3 is a new release that you haven't read yet, but you want to. So my answer for this is going to be Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. So honestly, the overarching reason for why I haven't read this yet is because Ben and I are starting to kind of be strategic about our book collections, in the sense that we know that one day in the somewhat near future, we're going to be combining and amalgamating our book collections, and we don't really want there to be an excess amount of double copies if there doesn't have to be. And so a lot of the times, if there's a book that we both really want, granted, if there's a book that we both really want to read right now, immediately, we're not gonna make ourselves suffer. We'll get the book, we'll get it, and we'll read it. But in some cases, like Tress of the Emerald Sea, there's a situation where it's oh, do we like the American cover more, or do we like the UK cover more? We'll kind of make that decision, and one of us will buy it. And so I most likely won't be reading this one soon, just because I will be waiting to have a copy of it physically, I guess. But I could also read it while I am visiting Ben. But that's sort of the deal, where that's why I haven't read it yet, just because I wasn't going to buy myself a copy, because quite frankly, it's unnecessary. You could say the same for Yellowface by R.F. Kuang, just as an example, where yeah, I want to read that book too, but well, I guess that could also apply to this question, because that was released this year, wasn't it? Or was it last year? But whatever, Ben has a copy of that book, and yeah, I want to read it, but I don't need to read it right now, and so I will wait. But back to Tress, I'm actually really pleasantly surprised at the positive reception to that book. I think that I had a little bit of skepticism, not in Brandon Sanderson's ability to write 4 books quickly, but just that I wasn't sure where the quality would be, just because of the fact that he did write them so quickly. And so I'm just very pleasantly surprised to hear that a lot of people love Tress, and it does make me very much want to read that one. The 4th question is your most anticipated book release for the second half of the year. And so this one is no contest, Labyrinth's Heart by M.A. Carrick. I've already pre-ordered this book. I just talked about how much I loved The Liar's Knot, the second book in the series, and I am so eager to see where that series goes, how it wraps up. I'm just in love with everything that author duo is doing with this series, and I am going to have an electronic ARC copy of that I'm going to read in early August, before the book comes out, maybe even late July, since I'm traveling to see Ben in early August. But regardless, I am gonna have a review come out for that on release day. Like I said, I've pre-ordered it. I can't wait to get my hands on it. I'm just trying to wait so that my thoughts are more fresh for being closer to the time of release. Question 5 is your biggest disappointment, and this is always a hard question to answer, and it's not because I don't know what my answer is. It's hard to answer because I don't want any book to be my biggest disappointment, but expectations are a thing, and sometimes something being your biggest disappointment doesn't even mean that it was bad. It just might mean that you had sky-high expectations and it didn't meet them, and therefore it disappointed you. And so that is sort of the case in both of my answers for this question, but we'll get into a little bit more of the thoughts on this. So my first answer for biggest disappointment is unfortunately The Bone Ships by R.J. Barker, and this is definitely one where, so this was a recommendation from Matt's Fantasy Book Reviews, and this book, for me, it ended strong. So this was not a bad book overall, although I did struggle at the start of it. This one suffers from having this same kind of nautical, seafaring, adventure, character-driven type of description that made me think that it was going to be like Live Ship Traders by Robin Hobb. And in certain ways, it kind of is like that. But the thing is, Live Ship is one of my favorite series of all time, and this was just not hitting the same notes. The writing style wasn't working for me early on. I was not invested in the characters until near the very end of the book, and a lot of it at the beginning of this was just not working for me. I was struggling. I do have an episode of Reading Booktubers' Favorite Books about this book, and so there are in-depth vlog thoughts about where I was throughout my journey, what I was thinking. So if you're interested in more in-depth thoughts on what I was thinking and what the weaknesses were and what my problems were with this book, that can be found there. I'll link that video in the description. But yeah, I am actually really intrigued for the second book in this series, just because I did enjoy the ending of this quite a lot more than the beginning, but it was a disappointment just because of how much I struggled with the start. And then I don't know what's wrong with me here, because the second book here is actually also a Reading Booktubers' Favorite Books pick. I'm so sorry, but that is The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri. And so this is definitely one of those situations where it being a disappointment for me does not mean that it was a bad book. With The Jasmine Throne, the disappointment for me was was specifically in my lack of ability to emotionally connect with this. And it is also in comparison to the Daevabad trilogy, and I think that these two were so wrapped up in my head because I know that Stephanie and Angela love both of them, and I share a lot of my reading tastes with both of them. And just the fact that I had always associated The Jasmine Throne with Daevabad in my head, that I was expecting to love it just as much as I loved the Daevabad trilogy, and it just didn't hit for me in that way. And so there's a lot to like about The Jasmine Throne. There is the magic, which is very, very interesting. It is involved with personal sacrifice, and it's a very kind of gritty magic system. It does have sort of a whimsical quality to it, but it also is pretty grim in ways. And you have the female-female relationship between Malini and Priya. You also have their individual character arcs. You have this theme, this overarching theme of the actions of the people in a subjugated country and how rebellions can be sparked. And it's just on the surface, from an objective standpoint, there are so many things about this that I should have loved. And I do think it delivers on these buzzwords that it promises, but for some reason, I just didn't connect with it fully. And for that reason, that was really disappointing to me because I wanted to love it so much. Question number 6 is your biggest surprise of the year so far. And so I have actually spoken a little bit about this before in my favorite books of the year so far, but my answer for biggest surprise is going to be Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. And the reason that this was such a surprise for me is not because I don't like literary fiction, because I know that I do often like the literary fiction that I read, but this one is sort of advertised as a book about two people whose childhood and their relationship throughout their adult years is based on the fact that they are both video game developers and that they both love video games. And once you get into the book, you realize that it's so much more than that because it's really about the human relationships. But initially, I was like, well, I don't play video games. I don't really have the history with them to get the type of references or cultural significance or anything like that, or even like the artwork history or the computer development history behind video games. Like, I don't know anything about any of that. So my initial thought was, well, the book probably wouldn't hit for me, like maybe it just wouldn't be for me. But Ben was really interested in it, and my mom actually ended up buying him that book for Christmas, and so there was a copy of it around, and so I just thought, well, this was a really popular book last year, so maybe I'm gonna read it, and I fell in love with it. I loved it. It hit so hard for me. I was so pleasantly surprised, and so like this is just one where it was the subject matter where I was pleasantly surprised to find how Gabrielle Zevin approached the art and the development, because I think that the fact that Sadie and Sam, the main characters, are growing up throughout the book and growing through their art and learning and everything really helps you as the reader, even if you don't have any of that knowledge, kind of develop with them. And obviously video games are a central focus of the book, but like I said, like the emotional impact of this book is really surrounding the character relationships and the individual character arcs and their development as people and what they go through and what happens between them and to them and their friends and everything. So that was the strength of it for me, and it's definitely a favorite book of the year so far, and I was just really pleasantly surprised by how much I ended up loving it. Question number 7 is your favorite new author, debut or new to you. So I have to give this title to S.A. Chakraborty. There are other authors that I've read for the first time this year. Like I mentioned, Gabrielle Zevin has written one of my favorite books of the year. It could have been her. But the reason that I want to give this title to S.A. Chakraborty is just because I had never read one of her books before picking up City of Brass in February. And since I read the whole trilogy in such short order and loved every single one of those books, it feels like it has more of an impact for me. I've read 3 of her books in the first half of the year, and I fell in love with the way that she writes and crafts the story and brings the characters to life. And actually, like, I'm not necessarily usually a plot-driven reader, but I adored the plot that she wove throughout this trilogy. Like, I think that's what elevates it to another level for me, is that I loved the direction that the story was going at pretty much every turn, and she definitely cemented herself as an auto-read author for me, and the Daevabad trilogy is a favorite series, so I'm so happy that I got to experience S.A. Chakraborty in the first half of 2023. Question number 8 is my newest fictional crush, and this is a difficult one just because, like, I don't find this question silly or anything. Like, I definitely get fictional crushes sometimes, but I feel like it doesn't happen that often to me. Like, when a character really, really captures me, a lot of the time it stays over a long period of time, and it's not like, I don't even know if this makes sense, but it's not like in the first half of the year I can necessarily just like gain a new fictional crush. Like, it seems like there's got to be a perfect storm in order for it to happen. And so the person that I've chosen is kind of funny in a way, but I just think that he would be a great significant other. So the person that I chose is Carson from the Rainwild Chronicles. And the reason that this is funny is because, like, Carson's not even straight. Like, he's certainly not going to be interested in me in response if said fictional crush was a real person. But I love Carson so much. Like, in a series where Robin Hobb, she's a phenomenal character writer, but in a series where a lot of the characters like either make terrible decisions or are really questionable people, Carson is just such a level-headed, like, wonderful man who I feel like deserves happiness. And like, if Carson was straight, I would totally marry that man. And so that's my choice. Like, I don't know, if you've read the Rainwild Chronicles, Obviously I'm only halfway through it, so like he could take a nosedive off the deep end of not being a good person, but so far in Dragon Keeper and Dragon Haven, my new fictional crush is Carson. Question 9 is your newest favorite character, and so honestly, this question is literally just a mirror of the best sequel you've read so far in 2023, because while I found it very difficult to choose an individual character to call my new favorite, what I ended up doing is basically just picking the main characters from The Liar's Knot and Kingdom of Copper. So my first choice is Ren and Gray and Vargo, and my second answer is Nari and Ali. And so like the three of them, Ren and Gray and Vargo, like their individual arcs and how their arcs intertwine and the relationships between them and like the emotional depth of them is taken to such a new level in The Liar's Knot that I loved all three of them so much. Like they are complex and emotional and real, and like the three of them are just doing their best. And I basically feel the same way about Nari and Ali. Like these are characters fighting for what they believe in. They are really just trying to be good people in a world where taking a wrong step because of the place that they particularly hold in society, like taking a wrong step can honestly have catastrophic consequences for the like political and cultural tensions. And so they are trying to be true to themselves and fight for what they believe in while also trying to not like bring the world crashing down on them. And I love this dynamic, and I love all five of these characters like in their respective series. I love the dynamics between them, and so I really just couldn't choose between them. I had to kind of shout out all of them. Question number 10 is a book that made you cry, and I'm pretty emotional when I read. Like I am definitely a crier, so I'm sure that there has been more than this. Like I know that there have been other books that I have teared up at, but I think that two books that stand out that have made me quite emotional while reading them are actually two of the non-fantasy books that I've read this year. So the first one that I'm going to shout out is Panenka by Ronan Hessian, which was recommended to me by Ben, and this is the story of our main character, a man who is around 50 named Panenka, and his life and the trajectory of his life has kind of revolved around something that happened in his 20s, a mistake that he made as a professional football player that kind of soured the team and the fan base's opinion on him, and he has never really emotionally or socially recovered from that. And this is sort of just like a quietly emotional story about Panenka and about his daughter and his grandson and also his son-in-law and like a woman that he meets. And it's sort of just a day-to-day life emotional reflection on how these characters go through the world, and I loved the emotional resolution here. Like the end of this book had me crying for sure, and the emotional resonance of this, it makes me remember the impact of this book, and I can still kind of feel that when I think about this book. And then the second book that made me cry is I'm once again going to mention Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. There were some more heavily emotional parts of this that had me crying pretty freely, but there are also some other parts of this where they are more quietly emotional that had me kind of tearing up. There's one moment in particular that I remember that really made me cry that was a tough moment to read, but throughout the whole book, the relationships between characters are kind of just very raw and real, and at times like regular, I guess you could call it, moments between characters would kind of just make me tear up just because they really just had that emotional quality to them. And so I really appreciated that about Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. And I can just say that throughout the whole book, I kind of really felt those emotions. Question number 11 is a book that made you happy. And there are a ton of books that I've read this year that at times have made me like cheer and feel triumph and like whatever feelings like that, because a lot of the time fantasy has those moments. But if I'm gonna pick books that kind of just gave me this feeling of joy throughout the whole thing. I have two in mind for that. So the first book that really made me happy is Honey and Spice by Bolu Babalola. So this is a romance about our main character, Kikiola, who runs like a radio show on her college campus, basically helping women to, I don't know, not get taken advantage of by guys, just generally. So it's sort of like an advice show, and she has this reputation on campus as being like for the girls. And there is a new guy on campus named Malachi who she ends up sort of like kissing as a way to escape a situation, but she had recently been kind of like declaiming him on her show as a player, and so they kind of have to deal with this impact to both of their reputations by pretending to date so that it can save their images. And I love a fake dating trope. I always eat that up, and this had like so many of the favorite story beats. It really just was a joy to read, and it's also the main characters and the like whole cast of characters in this book are just so like, they had so much personality, like they really leaped off the page for me. And this is another book where I loved the descriptions of food because I'm not sure if I'm saying this right, but the main character is Yoruba. And so there are descriptions of that type of food. And I also feel like just since this is taking place in, I think it's Southwest London, London also just has an amazing food scene in general, like so much diversity and so much food to be had, like people making like authentic food from where they're from. So it's actually like a good version of that food. And that's something that also sticks out to me in here. And the whole book was just vibrant and very happy, and it made me very happy. The second book that made me happy is Heartstopper Volume 3. And honestly, I don't even think this needs an explanation on why it would have made me happy, but suffice it to say, it is simply adorable. And I also really enjoyed that this one brought in a few more heavier elements like mental health and eating disorders and the challenges of how to come out and how to have to sort of continuously be doing that. So with that said, those obviously aren't the happy elements, but Alice Oseman still manages to keep the lighthearted tone, especially since this has like young adult characters in it. But the whole thing is just a joy to read because Nick and Charlie are so adorable. Question number 12 is the most beautiful book you've bought this year or received as a gift. And so I'm gonna say this counts, even though technically it was at the very end of last year because it was a Christmas gift. But I got If We Were Villains by ML Rio from Ben as a Christmas gift. So this is a really, really pretty edition. This is the 5th anniversary illustrated edition. For a second I was going to say 50th anniversary. I was like, this book is not that old. But it has some, let's just see if I can find one. It has some nice like artwork in here, if you can see that. And it also just has like, it has these end pages that have artwork as well. The whole thing is very pretty. And the naked hardcover has this on the front. And it's just a very nice, like, I don't know, it's a very pretty hardcover. And I haven't really bought a ton of special editions this year. Like a lot of the special editions that I have, I've been kind of dialing it back on that and just buying regular books, which I definitely have not stopped doing. And so this is definitely the most beautiful book that I've gotten recently. The other one that I want to mention, because I thought that I would go with one that I got as a gift and one that I bought myself, was this lovely painted edition of Little Women that has the gilded edges, and it has just like the entire thing is this painted landscape. And I love Little Women. I've never even actually reread it, but this book just brought me so much joy when I read it the first time, and I loved the most recent movie adaptation. And I really should read this again, but when I saw this in Indigo, this was basically the same price as a regular hardcover book, and it is so gorgeous and stunning that I just couldn't resist having it on my shelf because, like, this is a book that just made me happy. And I wanted to have it in this like beautiful edition. Lastly, question number 13 to finish out the tag is, what books do you need to read by the end of the year? And so along with basically every other booktuber, the answer to that is way too many. But if I could just focus on a couple answers for this, the first one would be the booktuber's favorites book picks. I pick one of those out of my jar every single month and read it and make a video on it. And so I'm definitely planning to read those by the end of the year. And then the second one would be Robin Hobb. On our current trajectory, we are planning to finish out The Realm of the Elderlings this year, which is an exciting and also kind of upsetting prospect, just because I don't really want to be done with it. Like, I want to read more of it, but I don't want it to be over. And then the next one is just like continuing series in general, because I feel like I've been doing quite well with that. And something that sort of goes hand in hand with that is focusing on my physical TBR, like books that I already own. And I feel like I'm doing well at that as well. So rather than just listing specific books, those are kind of the goals that I would like to continue to make progress towards by the end of 2023. So I have the sneaking suspicion that this ended up a lot longer than I intended, possibly because when you asked me to talk about books that I had strong feelings about, I can't help but just either gush or like expound on my feelings about them, whether that's complaints or reasons that I loved it. But that is the mid-year book Freakout Tag. Those are my answers to the questions. And of course, this is not really a tag that you get tagged in, like everyone does this. So if you see this, please keep in mind that I would love to see your versions of it, because I just love to see people's answers to these questions. And if you want to put your answers down in the comments below, I would absolutely welcome seeing that as well. So that is it for this one. Please like this if you liked it. Let me know what you thought down in the comments, and subscribe if you'd like to see more content from me. As always, I will have my socials and Discord linked in the description if you're interested in any of that. And I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. Bye!